Welcome back to the second half of my conversation with Chris Kudlick from Cisco, and we're talking about infrastructure management platforms, Intersight, and some of the features that are beneficial to infrastructure today, or organizations anyway, who are dealing with infrastructure that is not only on-prem but also leveraging some form of hybrid cloud or maybe some edge computing. And Chris, thanks for the conversation that we just finished off. But I do want to kind of pivot a little bit here because there is one specific feature that I think is really a great set, not only for just building out infrastructure, but understanding what is actually running on prem today.
Yeah.
And so I had a previous conversation with another colleague who we had a conversation around what are the workloads today. Ultimately, when you move those anywhere, you need to understand how they're supposed to run, how are they best performant, um, and sort of kind of grab a baseline. Because if you're just running whatever and you expect to run whatever in hybrid, your cost could be great, and so you really don't understand how it should be running and what's the best way to perform, at least from an on-prem perspective. So I always look to say, if I'm moving to hybrid, what's the metric that I use to gauge that I'm actually successful in cloud or in another solution, whether it's another data center or something like that. So,
Yeah.
um, I'll let you intro it. I'll let you know exactly what I'm talking about, and then
Yep.
let's dive into some of that because I think there's a lot of good stuff there.
Absolutely. Yeah, Kristen. So, when we were talking previously about Intersight, we were really talking about the infrastructure management side of it, all the way through the hypervisor. But we know that everything is about applications. There wouldn't be a need for hypervisor or servers if we didn't have applications running on
That's
them.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
there wouldn't be a need for them. And applications are really I guess you could say, like the intermediary between a customer or an employee and IT. It's really the way that the two will interface between each other. And when we think about everything that is these days is an application. I mean, we're using an application here to record this podcast. We have, anytime that we make a phone call, we're making it from an application on our phone. Anytime that we're streaming video right on our TVs these days, if we go to YouTube TV or Hulu or something, that's an application that's running on the TV that interfaces into other applications and containers out there in IT world. And so there's two different aspects of that. There's performance and there's cost. And Christian, you brought up terrifically there, where performance. Quite frankly, we've actually seen even instances where things that have so many resources thrown out of them actually sometimes perform worse.
Yeah.
Sometimes with CPUs, with the CPU ready kind of interface into there. Sometimes CPUs like to be running. And if they're sitting there idle for a while, sometimes it takes a little while to wake them up, right? Kind of like myself in the morning. but
Not just you.
but at the same time, with when we're talking about performance aspects of it, imagine being able to find out how that application is going to run, and in what size, in which cloud, at the optimal price point. Because before, we have solutions like Intersight Workload Optimizer, which can go in and give you all of this information. A lot of our customers are like, well, we need to start moving things into the cloud because we know we have to be a little bit agile, and we need to make sure that there's some uptime. And as an operations person, I want to wipe my hands of it, and the developers can just develop inside of the cloud for their applications. But a lot of times the operations team is like, well, let's put everything up there. I want everything extra large because I don't have this information.
And that's
And
why they come back. I mean, ultimately,
yeah,
that's what drives them back, right? I think the costs just get too great.
yeah, exactly. And but sometimes even those applications aren't running to their best ability out there. And of course, if I'm a C level, I would always want to know, are my applications operating well enough to support my business, or to be able to give the best customer experience, because almost every single one of our customers these days has some sort of customer facing application. It's how they interface with their customers. And but at the same time, minimizing the costs, because there's no need to be paying for resources that might not even be being used, and in some instances might even be hindering. And so a solution like Intersight Workload Optimizer, which is a plugin that's automatically inside of Intersight, can give you all this information. You can actually say, well, if I'm going to migrate this set of applications to the cloud, how much is it going to cost? What size should it look like? Which cloud should I put it in? Or should I just keep it on-prem? It might make sense to keep some of these applications on-prem for cost and for production reasons and security reasons too. I mean, security is a big piece of this too. But if I'm a C level and or vice president or director, et cetera, or if I'm just an application owner, I would probably want to know how much money I'm going to be spending. But more importantly, probably, is my application going to perform better in AWS or Azure? I would probably want to
Right.
know that because most of our customers aren't just hybrid cloud, but multi-cloud. There's going to be certain applications that run great on-prem. There's going to be certain ones that might run better and might cost less in AWS. Same for Azure, same for Google Cloud. So how do we determine that over time? Because some of our customers, like retail, they're probably going to be getting really busy here 2 Fridays from now,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where, once Black Friday hits, and all the sales happen, and for everybody to purchase, the gifts that for the holidays that come up in December and January. Ultimately, when all that happens, a lot of our retail customers have to start scaling because to meet that demand, and being able to monitor all that demand, but also once the demand is over, scaling that back. That's a huge part of what Workload
Exactly.
Optimizer does for you.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so um in my previous conversation, optimization is also it leads to cost optimization too, right? Because if
Mhm.
you're over provision, you're using resources that technically could be used somewhere else.
Right.
And so the product, right? So Workload Optimizer um, takes your workloads and runs it over a course of time and looks at historical information on how your workload or your application is running, right? And then
Yeah.
it determines what's the best suited resources for it at any given time. Now, yes, we're moving into a time where applications are just going to kind of go through the roof, but
Yeah.
that's like seasonal.
Yeah.
There are other applications that are just, maybe during the week they kind of, hit a peak. Schools, for instance, when students are registering. So every workload's different. So understanding how your workload works or how it performs, and you get that visual, you can then translate that. And so again, using workload optimizer inside of Intersight, you translate what you know historically, and you can build a footprint that says, hey, if I move to a hybrid situation where this application is going to move to AWS, Azure, or Google, what are the sizes that I need to fit inside of, but at the same time, it needs to be there for the peak point of your application, right? It needs to be
Yeah.
enough where you can actually consume some of that. And then at, like you said, at the end of the season, these things are going to be doing nothing. They're going to be very latent, or not latent, very dormant, I guess, if you want to
Yeah.
call it that, where they're not using enough. So you remove those resources to, obviously get the benefits of cost. Because ultimately, I think when we look at these hybrid situations and we're looking at cloud, it really comes down to saying, hey, I want the best bang for my buck, and people keep telling me that it's the cloud.
Yeah.
Some people are getting burned because they were led the wrong way, but ultimately, people are looking to save on these cloud infrastructure they're putting together. So
Yeah.
that's where I say, I had mentioned this in the beginning, is if you don't have a solid baseline of your application and how it should perform and the resources that it uses, then you're not going to be very successful inside of a cloud. And if you do have those metrics from somewhere like Workload Optimizer, you can then gauge against that when you're in the cloud, saying, "Hey, I should be running at this, performance. These are the resources that I need." So you can kind of gauge what your costs are going to be and see if you're within that or not. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So had when you're working out there, and obviously you've had some clients that are leveraging some of this. Are you seeing anything different than that? Are people using it differently? Are they seeing the actual value of what Workload Optimizer does at all? I
So,
mean,
yeah, and I would say that with with a product like IWO, it's actually the more information you feed into it is the better it's going to operate. And so our customers, for instance, will have their hypervisors, which is pretty low hanging fruit, connect into there. And then they'll connect their clouds into there, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. Those are the three big ones out there. There are a couple other ones that are out there, but those are the three main ones that connect in. But we can even take that a step further into the FSO story, the full stack observability story. And now we can actually start taking triggers from APMs, right? Or application perform management
Yep.
solutions. So at Cisco, we have one called App Dynamics. But there's some other ones out there like Dynatrace and New Relic as well. Some customers, prefer those, but of course we always love it when our customers go with App Dynamics. But needless to say, an application or an APM, what that does is you run it inside of those containers or inside of the serverless or in terms of each portion of the microservices or each aspect of the application, because with containerization, we kind of know that everything is now segmented into containers. And quite frankly, it's so that as a developer develops on something, you don't have to wait for other teams in order to fix or to put out new features into your side of the container. So, for instance, let's take a typical shopping cart or retail shop where you might be able to purchase something online. The overall user interface or adding new products and pictures and pricing is going to probably be a different container from the shopping cart.
Right.
However, as we, if you want to buy one or two or 1,000, etc., of something and you put it into your cart, that communication has to rely on the interface and the shopping cart operating correctly. And then that shopping cart then has to go through the payment area and making sure that the address is put in correctly and any coupons, etc. If any aspect of that breaks, you want to know about it right away because the user interface is pretty much, affected. If like for instance, if I'm waiting for an Uber, and if Uber ever goes down, then you switch over to Lyft, right? And that's how the customers will do it these days until Lyft, might go down. Then you might go back to Uber. But losing customers like that on a very regular basis is pretty critical of a problem for a lot of our customers. So imagine being able to see if there was, some gridlock happening with an application, or, maybe it's line 256 of the Java code, and this is where where everything is starting to occur,
Hmm.
bottlenecks, etc., and being able to alert the developers to fix that portion of it right away so that my application is back up and running. To maintain that customer experience is key. But App Dynamics and the other APMs out there find those triggers, but they can also feed that information into IWO to take action on those keys. So, for instance, if it's saying, "Man, this VM is being overloaded. We need to create 4, 5, 6, etc., more VMs of this certain type, put them into a cluster because we're getting extreme demand." A trigger like IWO can do that, right? So, when it triggers that, it's really like the playbook of everything happening in your environment. And so it's really a critical part of that full stack observability story from Cisco. Between that, Thousand Eyes, which of course can go out and see, whether or not there is an issue with a public cloud or a provider or some sort of, PRI or maybe some sort of SIP trunk internally, etc., and being able to tie all of these together into the full stack observability so that you can pinpoint problems quicker, to be able to resolve them quicker because problems arise, right? We see it all the time. Clouds even go down, for God's sakes, like
Oh yeah.
AWS and Azure. Sometimes there's outages there too. And so,
Exactly. Yep.
but and that kind of leads into how many, the more information you feed into that orchestrator, into that playbook, the better it's going to be, the better the decision making is going to be. And a lot of times for our customers, it's crawl, walk, run. They'll want to see what's happening, then
Hmm.
they might take the reins off a little bit and resolve some actions manually. And we have customers out there that are fully automated, meaning like if IWO sees something, they trust IWO to take care of it, and it does. Um, so that's really the key. And of course, the other piece of it is making it non-intrusive. So IWO, there is no agent. Some of the
Right.
other softwares out there need agents in order to observe into it. IWO doesn't need that. it's basically based off of the information it's pulling from APIs or whatever information you're feeding into it.
Yeah, yeah, true. And I mean, I think that's a great point that you had made. We talked about APIs before,
Hmm.
and then not only having that FSO conversation, so you have App Dynamics that's able to speak to IWO, but at the same time, if you're looking to build something that's autonomous, I guess, right, where you have full autonomy in your infrastructure to be able to increase and decrease based on the application, or in this case, App Dynamics or any other APM, but the ability to change workloads, change resources, add additional storage, make a few changes in your infrastructure, I think is key when it comes to our world today. Our world is really driven by, let me focus on what matters the most, that's going to make money to the business without having being tied up with some of these things that you manually have to do, right, adding resources and getting all these things taken care of. But I
Hmm.
think IWO being the piece where, again, it's, even though it's not the hardware level of it, right, we talked about the hardware level with the servers and storage, and we're now at the virtualization platform when it comes to IWO and the VMs that are running, and then on top of that being the application stack. um, where do you see it going from here? Because I mentioned, and I don't know if we would get the full autonomy. I think there's still a little, ways to go there. It's like, the self-driving car. Do we really want to get into self-driving car yet? It's a great concept, I think, but still, there's some type of control that we need to feel, right, to make decisions. Because I think a lot of our decisions are not based on just some of the information that we're fed, but there's a gut feeling that sometimes I think that we can make a better judgment.
Yeah.
So where do you see this going, at least from again, the higher thing, is it development looking at leveraging APIs and infrastructure such as Intersight to be able to get to full autonomy, or like where do you see that going?
So I really see that I believe that it's probably going to go into the capability for our customers to start creating cloud native applications. As you know, there's so many legacy applications out there that run with legacy code,
Yeah.
and as customers move into that cloud native type of realm, sometimes and most of the time they have to almost reprogram their applications. And so I feel like something like this is actually going to start being able to automate maybe some of that code creation, being able to almost convert some of these legacy apps into today what would be a cloud native application, as well as running those cloud applications on prem or in the public cloud, or maybe a mixture of both, so that you have control of something on prem where you're not releasing control out to a public cloud provider. Uh,
Right.
I think that's really where this type of solution is going to be heading
Okay.
out to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're dead on where the applications today need to have access to multiple areas to make the application run as it's intended, right? And whether that's adding additional resources, or maybe, I mean, maybe you have some hardware sitting around that could auto provision. So if you feel like you're going to have a growth spurt, I think supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. We've been hearing that for how long now, and it's been tougher to get some of these servers or any infrastructure for that matter. But so if you have that sitting around to be able to auto provision on top of that, not only just at the hardware, the VM level, and then moving your application to something more cloud native where you can now leverage hybrid, like you had mentioned, right?
Yep.
And then being able to have developers program some of this to be able to live in some type of I don't know if symbiotics the word, but where you're kind of ingrained where with multiple things, again, to get to the best performant application that the business can provide.
Yep.
And I think brand aware, or brand and dollars is really what is at stake here. You had
Yep.
mentioned it. If I'm sitting there, and I call an Uber and something happens, I'm calling Lyft. So that those are dollars lost. I just experienced it the other day with one of the apps. I wanted to order something and it just was not, acting right. It's frustrating. So I just moved to another restaurant, right? That
Yeah.
had an app, and I was able to order it, much faster. So a lot of these things do come into play, and when it comes to the infrastructure. But going back to some of the components of IWO, there's a key feature in there I think that you may have touched upon, but I just do want to bring it to the forefront is the fact that we can actually plan,
Yeah.
right? I think one of the key aspects of it is it's one thing to know your environment, and it's another thing to be able to plan,
Yeah.
right? What's the future hold? Or maybe you're going through a refresh, whether it's on-prem, or maybe again, your decision is I want to move these things to a hybrid type of situation where I'm using one of the hyperscalers. But you know, talk a little bit about a planning because I think that's key when it comes to some of these organizations that want to scale out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, with Iowa, we call that feature really capacity planning and being able to say, well, I am planning on this application possibly growing 6, 10, 20x, maybe over the next couple months or maybe in the next couple years. Um, and also, some of our customers or a lot of our customers out there might not be ready to make that cloud journey yet, or they might be in legacy hardware, want to go to newer hardware. Well, the chips today run much faster than they did 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
We have multiple cores, we have faster RAM, we have persistent memory nowadays, GPU capabilities, etc. And so, if I wanted to move my existing infrastructure and I'm planning, let's say for next year, if I wanted to, find out how much I should be budgeting for a hardware refresh, well, I might have 10 servers today, but I might only need five because of, how the chips and the RAM and everything is basically getting much faster. And knowing the right fit for that infrastructure for maybe the next 3 to 4 years, you can run those type of reports inside of IWO to come up with all that information. If I want my application to expand, or if I want to find out what cloud is going to be best for my application, we can run the capacity plans against that. We can do the what ifs, in a graphical type of interface. And if we need to expand out a virtual machine, it might make sense to maybe do some of those virtual machines on-prem versus in the cloud. But if I'm going to expand them out in the cloud, I can kind of get an idea of how much it's going to cost, when it's going to cost that much, all that kind of information. So yeah, planning is absolutely key, Christian.
Yeah, and some of I know some of the things that I've worked with, and the outputs that are there really helps you take that to the business, right? To say that we need additional dollars, or it's going to cost us X amount to be, in a certain cloud provider, or maybe we just need to buy additional infrastructure for on-prem.
Yeah.
So having the ability to use a metrics based, I guess, output to be able to take that to the business, it actually speaks volumes when they're looking at not like, hey, I just need some infrastructure and I think it's going to be this and it's going to cost you X amount. Now you can actually use some real data points that would help your case when you're trying to get the additional dollars.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
and being able to have the proof behind the pudding, right? Being able to
exactly.
actually say, this is how much savings we're going to be estimating versus, just trying to come up with, a mathematical expression or a mathematical solution on
Yeah,
your own. Being able to have, that's really the way, one of the main reasons for, computers and servers these days is to be able to crunch this information to give it as accurate as possible.
yep, definitely, definitely. And some of those dollars saved, I mean, I'll go back to it again. We can definitely get ourselves a pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, yeah. So hey, it was great talking to you, Chris. I think we've covered a lot when it comes to Intersight as a management platform. Our previous conversation around servers, but specifically today, when we talk about Iowa, I think some of the key pieces that I took away and definitely add on top of it as I kind of summarize some of this so our listeners can kind of get the gist of what we talked about.
Mhm.
Having Wo really gives you that visibility into your workloads, your applications, gives you the right sizing aspects. Meaning, when I say right sizing, what are the true resources that are needed for that application to run in a performant manner?
Yeah.
It gives you that visibility to be able to do that. And on top of it, we have APIs that you can leverage, APMs that actually make adjustments to your infrastructure based on the application side of things, as well. And it also gives provides us a way to plan. So if you have a strategy that's going to move to the cloud, what t-shirt sizes do you need in AWS to run your workload or your application, and then being able to take that to the line of business for the additional dollars that you're looking for with some
Mhm.
type of metrics to back it up. I mean, that's kind of like the gist
Yeah.
of it. Anything you want to add, Chris?
That basically summed it up right there, Christian. Yep,
Awesome. 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 And now, real quick, is there a feedback that I can send back to maybe order a pizza for myself?
I think so.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can go to
Awesome.
innovatorsight.com, ask for it there, and we'll see if you get one. But I'm not promising
All
anything.
right. Okay. Hey, I appreciate your conversation. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and look forward to the next one.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Christian. Appreciate it.
Take care.